So in today's gospel, we're greeted with a message of invitation and reassurance. At least the second half of that gospel. Come to me, all you that are weary and are carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. I think these three sentences capture for me what it means to live a life grounded in faith, lived in community and in communion with others. First, three things I distill from this. First, that we all carry burdens. Come to me, all that are weary and carrying burdens. The persistent and sometimes heavy concerns and worries that we each bear and often try to conceal from others with our masks of composure. And the second point is God doesn't erase those burdens. We're told, I will give you rest. So the burdens are not erased, but we are provided a space for rest and relief. And it's through that rest that burdens can become manageable, and restoration and reconciliation become possible. And the third point I take away from these sentences is that there is work involved. Take my yoke upon you. The yoke is not a symbol of leisure or passivity. It's an implement. It's a tool that allows energy to be directed to effect a transformation. It's the yoke that allows oxen to pull a plow, directing their energy downward to break open the earth and allow for new life to grow. It's worth noting here, just quickly, that the Greek word Christos is probably better translated as good or kind instead of easy. So another way to hear this is, for my yoke is good, for my yoke is kind, and my burden is light. Now, I think the first 2 points are fairly obvious, at least once we're reminded of them. Everyone I've met, no matter how well lived or comfortable their life, has carried burdens. All have been acquainted with some combination of longing or grief or fear or some combination of those. And I've also never met someone whose burdens are fully relieved or erased. With the help of the Spirit working in us and through us, some burdens can be reframed and redeemed, becoming a source of purpose instead of a source of pain. Yet this is a work more of transformation than erasure or removal. So having recognized that we all carry burdens, that God doesn't erase them, but instead provides us space and rest to make those burdens more manageable, let's turn to the more interesting challenge of what the work might be, of what it might mean to take on the yoke. The idea that work is an essential component of a life following Christ's teaching, a life guided by faith, is not new. The Epistle of James asks us, what good is it if someone claims to have faith but does not have works? Surely that faith cannot save. Goes on to provide an example. If a person is naked and lacks daily food, and one of you says to them, go in peace, keep warm and eat your fill, and yet you don't supply their needs, what is the good of that? So faith by itself, if it has no works, is dead. But we, and I mean this as clergy or leaders of the church, often don't do a good job of articulating what the work is. Now, I hope all of you received the e-gospel, the e-newsletter that we send out every Friday, and near the bottom of that email is a section called From the Archives. And this week's passage comes from 1949. It's written by, presumably, the rector of the time, the Reverend James Plum. And he writes, "One of the greatest weaknesses of Protestantism is laxity in church attendance." So it's comforting to know that was a problem then. But he goes on to quote the Book of Common Prayer. "What is your bounden duty as a member of the church? My bounden duty is to follow Christ, to worship God every Sunday in his church, and to work and to pray and to give for the spread of his kingdom." And my issue with that is it is framed as an attendance issue, right? And that's not to say that attendance is not important. Right? I was reminded during sermon seminar of the words of Vernon Dozier, who said that the church gathered, us coming together, is what gives strength to the church scattered. So this meeting in community, this being together, is what energizes us and sends us forth. But attendance in and of itself should not be the goal. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel wrote that the great challenge that we face is not the emptiness of pews, but the emptiness of people's hearts. Put another way, we are not called to watch church. We are called to live church. So how many of us, and I include myself as deficient in some of these, how many of us have actively taken on the yoke of reconciliation in our own lives? By reaching out to make amends with somebody who we have harmed, or someone who has harmed us? How many of us have actively taken on the yoke of invitation? If St. Mark's feeds you to the extent that you spend your time here, how many other people have you invited to do the same? How many of us have actively taken on the yoke of building a more just and more sustainable world? How have you shared your time and your talent and your treasure to bring this about? We are not called to be the people that Jesus describes in the beginning of today's gospel. Children sitting in the marketplace calling to one another. When the flute is played, not dancing. When people wailed, not mourning. We are called to be sensitive to the joys and sorrows of the world and to respond to them. Even the Genesis reading that we heard today shows the importance of showing up and acting. God's love is demonstrated through human action, through Rebekah saying yes, through a faithful servant looking, through Isaac accepting and loving somebody. And it's such a striking story in Genesis, because in the passages before and after, we hear God speak directly. But in today's reading, people act. God acts through people's actions. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Today and on all days, I invite you to accept that yoke, to meet the challenges that we are called to face, to do the work, knowing that the yoke is easy and the burden is light. Amen.